Prehistoric Dacia, the Pelasgians, the Titans. The most ancient and most glorious among all Palestinian tribes were the Titans. They were called by the authors Genus Antiquum Terrae and Terrae Fili Virgil. According to the Theogonies of Hesiod, the first children conceived with Gaia and Uranus were the Titans, 12 in number, 6 men and 6 women, and their names were the following: Oceanus, Koios, Cryos, Hyperon, Leptos, and Kronos, Rhea, Tethys, Thea, Mnemosyne, Nimbazine, and Phoebe. In fact, most of these names represent only simple personifications of geographical regions, rivers, and mountains. 1. Hyperon, a word whose meaning is person from beyond, represented, that's an odd name, represented the region from beyond the mountain, Transylvania of today, or the country from beyond, as the people from Romania call it. Anonymous Bele, Ragmaturus, Terra Ultra Savannah, and Ultra Silius. The Odyssey mentions Hyperia, or the country beyond, situated close to the Cyclops, from where Lafici immigrated. Tethys corresponds to the forms of Tetsis, and Tetsis or Tetsis conform to its ancient pronunciation. In the Old Greek language, the letter th had a sibilant sound, and s was added to t, and sometimes th represented z. For example, Zeus was in reality the same word as Theos. According to the ancient legends, Tethys had been married with Oceanus Potamos, or is true, and in this way they gave birth to a large number of names of big and important rivers, along which were settled various Palestinian populations. Hesiod, by its name as well as by the geography of the legends of Theogony, Tethys is only a personification of a big river from the western parts of ancient Dacia, which flows into the Danube. In medieval documents and chronicles of Hungaria, Tetia, the country of this goddess, was in the northern parts of Illyria, near the sources of the river Oceanus, or Istru. From a geographical point of view, Themis personified the antiquity to the river today called Timis, which springs from the southwestern Carpathians of Transylvania and flows into the Danube. One of the daughters of the goddess of Themis was called Dice, the goddess of justice. She just throws the dice. She represented by name and attributions. The most just of all, Herodotus. According to Herodotus, the most just of all Thracians, and according to Homer in the Iliad, the inhabitants from the north of Thrace were the most just of all peoples, and they were called the Getae. Thea, a lot of these names are just really hard to pronounce. The Hyperboreans, who dwelt, as we know, north of the lower Danube, were considered descendants of the Titans. Atlas, the most powerful king of the Hyperboreans, who later was transformed into a huge mount, was also a Titan, or in other words, the Titans were the dominant tribe of this kingdom. Latona, the Hyperborean virgin, who, being chased by Juno, wandered through the world and gives birth to Apollo and Diana in the island of Delos, was the daughter of a Titan. Titans played a very important role in the history of the First Palestinian Empire. They formed the most ancient, most noble, most energetic class in the social hierarchy. During the times of Uranus and Saturn, the first kings of the Palestinian state were from the family of the Titans. The Titans administered all the public functions. They were at the same time the religious chiefs of the Palestinian state, for which they were also called Titan gods. Homer, Hesiod, Theogony. It's funny, Theogony, I think we call theology. The Titans dethroned Uranus and gave the empire to Saturn, after which they sustained together a 10-year difficult war against Jove. But Saturn was defeated and Jove occupied the throne of Uranus. Unhappy with this change, the Titans rose again under the leadership of Atlas, wanting to oust Jove and reinstate Saturn, but their fate was unfavorable. They were defeated the second time, Hyginus, and their entire class was exterminated. Oh, nice. Some were shut into deep and vast cave called Tartaros assiduous theogony, while others left the region from near the Istru, immigrated and scattered through various Palestinian lands. The figure of a Titan from the Egyptian planisphere of Kircher, and they got the guy holding two snakes. The Battle of the Titans with Jove took place in the woodlands of Tartessius, near Cerna, on the territory of ancient Dacia, in the same region which figures under the name Sidereal Pylea at Homer, Iliad, Assiduous Theogony, or the mountains near the cataracts of the Danube. Now, I don't know if any of this is true, but I'm just reading this from this person about the Pelasgians, and a lot of it might just be metaphors, I don't know, but I just find it really interesting because I really am intrigued by the older a civilization is, the more intrigued I am to learn about it, so that's just checking it out. I'm not endorsing it, I'm just reading. In the Battle of Gade, the Roman general Crassus caught the brother of King Dapix, and afterwards he went to the vast and strong cave where the great number of the inhabitants of that land had taken refuge with their most precious objects and their flocks. In this cave, the legend tells us, had taken refuge the Titans, when defeated by the gods. The etymology and form of the name Titans is not Greek. Regarding to the ancient meaning of this word, Homer tells us that the Titans, proto-parents of the gods and the illustrious men, him. Metaphors for the planets, what was going on above their heads. Orphic hymn, the Titans are called the proto-parents of our parents. Pauli. We have therefore the explanation of the word Titans, with all the meaning of
patres and progenitores.
The etymology of this name is reduced then by its form and meaning to the radical tata or tata, parent, father, parent. It results therefore that the term Titans is identical by its origin and meaning with the Romanian form Titani, forefathers. Interesting. With the ousting of Saturn from the empire, the political role of the so-called Titani ceases. Their numerous class, rich, powerful, and superb, is completely extinguished. Oh, really? The Illuminati, maybe, of the time? Some are destroyed in a great civil war. Couldn't imagine that ever happening. Which ends with the catastrophe at Tartessius. Others are shut in dark caves, Tartaros, and those who could escape the fury of the victors are forced to find another country. Some take refuge in Italy, others scatter through Helena, Asia Minor, Hispania, and the northern parts of Europe, Germany. Among the most ancient tribes of Rome, the historical traditions mention the so-called Tatienses. These Tatini formed together with two other tribes called the Ramnes and Lucers.
Ramnes and Lucerus.
Ramnes and Lucerus, the wealthiest, most noble, and high social class of ancient Rome. They are called patres, and are considered as all the public affairs of the Roman state were in the hand of these parties. They alone administered, during a number of centuries, all the priestly, civil, and military functions. In the beginning, they considered themselves as the only intermediaries between gods and state. They were kind of Titania's theoi. They formed in the Roman state a permanent council of governance. They had the right to designate the king's successor. With them rested the decision of war and peace. Sounds like the Senate. Sure of their ancient glory, they considered themselves a class of a different nationality and a different blood than the other poor, uncultured citizens of obscure origins, whom they called plebes. Livy. Well, there you go. That's still going on today. Their traditional and privileged name of patres is also mentioned in the tabule. The origin of this patriarchal institution, of this Senate composed of representatives of certain ancient families, was without doubt predating the epoch of Romulus. It's just like the Senate today. You notice a guy spends his whole life in the Senate. Next thing you know, his son's in there. His cousin. And it's huge with nepotism. And can you imagine how great we could be if we had an educated electorate. But there are too many people that just don't care about anything except, watching TV and going shopping. That's unfortunate. But that's how these people can take advantage of us. It belonged to the original organization of the Palestinian society, or in other words, the fundamental organization of Rome was that which the Pelasgians had had in the times of the Titans. And they haven't given it up since. They've had it ever since. They've been in charge since the beginning. We find other remains of the noble and famous tribe of the Titans scattered around the Aegean Mediterranean Sea. As Philochorus tells us, one of the ancient Titans had settled in Attica, a powerful Titan with the name of
Titius.
Titius, son of Gaia, was mentioned as king of Euboea, Apollodorus. Finally, a tribe with the name Titi appears in the territory of Hispania, even at the time when this peninsula was not conquered by the Romans. They had a particular sympathy for the Roman people, a similarity, parents of Rome, towards them. Their legates were admitted in the Senate, and although they were barbarians, they were permitted to speak in their national language. Traces of the name of the ancient Titans from the lower Danube have been also preserved in the medieval documents of Hungary. A village with the name of Tathan, today Tetani, is mentioned at 1205 close to Buda. Another village, Tethun, was around 1279 in the country Simagiu, a wealthy and powerful family of nobles whose possessions were between the rivers Drava and Sava, is mentioned in the documents of Hungary with the name Genus Tethan. Finally, Tetinius Lucius appears on a Roman inscription from Dalmatia. Finally, we note here that in old Romanian folk ballad, the parents, or the senators of the city Brasov in Transylvania, it's funny, parents and senators are similar. That's what it means. Are called Tatori Turguli, and this name is attributed to them in a nationally good meaning, in no way ironic. At north of the lower Danube, the term Tartar comes from a very remote age. Greek historian Herodotus tells us that Hercules had learned the art of the bow and arrow from a Scythian called Teutaros. This shepherd from north of the lower Danube was therefore from the nation of the ancient Titans. In Greek theogonies, Saturn has also the epithet Tartaros, meaning father. In Egypt, though, Saturn was called more correctly Teutonian and was invoked in the following terms: parent of parents, great from the first time. Finally, Apollo, the god of the sun, who also had the epithet Titan, was venerated in some parts of Rome under the name Tortor. And Suetonius tells us, from the ethnic point of view, the Titans belong to the Palestinian nation. In the genealogy of prehistoric peoples, Titan, the proto-parent of the Titans, figures as a grandson of the king Pelasgi, Apollodorus. Wow, that was a wild chapter for the giants. Well, that should be interesting, but I'm going to call it Thebe. The etymologies of the names Pelasgians and Pelagos, open sea, from the Proto-Indo-European, are not quite satisfactory. Never cared for that word. Amazingly, there is not any satisfactory etymology for the name Hellenes, from Proto-Indo-European, but the name is connected with Pelasgian areas. In Homer, originally, the name is applied to the warriors of Aglaeus, looks like Achilles, and later the rest of the Greeks. Aglaeus, which looks very similar to Achilles, was born in Phthia, Phthiotis, and there is an ancient city named Hellas in the area. Nearby, there is an area which is called Graiki in ancient times, and is connected with a cataclysm, Ogyges, a Phoenician word, and there was an ancient city named Gria, which probably gave the name to the Greeks, Graikes, a word used by the Romans. An ancient Greek poet claims that the mother of Hellenes were Graikes. Albanian women equal beautiful in Greeks. Serbian propaganda about the priority of Slavs in Albanian areas. I don't know much about the area and all these different names. I suppose someone who was in the midst of it would know, but I think it's pretty safe to say, and here's one more here, the relations between Hellenism and Christianity in Byzantium, more correctly in the Eastern Roman Empire, in the period during Turkish rule. The Byzantine Empire was not Greek, but a Christian anti-Greek empire that destroyed the ancient Greek civilization and hated everything Greek. The Byzantine Empire banned the sacred Greek name Hellenes and replaced it with the despicable name Romeos. Been looking a little bit into this Pelasgian thing in Greece. Kind of came into a little current conspiracy here. During the classical period, enclaves under the name Pelasgian survived in several locations of mainland Greece, Crete, other regions of the Aegean Sea. Populations identified as Pelasgians spoke a language or languages that, at the time, Greeks identified as barbaric, though some ancient writers nonetheless described the Pelasgians as Greeks. A tradition also survived that large parts of Greece had once been Pelasgian before being Hellenized. Well, you know that the Hebrews call this age the Helid, and you got the Hellenes coming into Greece, and, well, they're bringing hell with them, apparently. So these Hellenes come in from nowhere, steal the land from the Pelasgians, and even take their mythology. But a large part of Greece had once been Pelasgian before being Hellenized. I just repeated myself. Parts fell largely, though far from exclusively, within the territory, which by the 5th century BC was inhabited by those speakers of ancient Greek, who were identified as Ionians and Elians. Not alien, but Elian. I remember a historian named Elian. Much like all other aspects of the Pelasgians, their ethnonym was Pelasgoi. It is of extremely uncertain provenance in etymology. This Maku Sakerlu collects 15 different etymologies proposed for it by the philologists and the linguists during the past 200 years, though he admits that most are fanciful. But ancient etymology based on mere similarity of sounds linked Pelesgos to Pelargos, stork, and postulates that the Pelasgians were migrants like storks, possibly from Egypt or Palestine. Similar maybe. From Egypt, where they nest. Aristophanes deals effectively with this etymology in his comedy, The Birds. One of the laws of the storks in the satirical Cloud Cuckoo Land, playing upon the Athenian belief that they were originally Pelasgians, is that grown-up storks must support their parents by migrating elsewhere and conducting warfare. Well, that sounds familiar. Nothing's changed. Gilbert Murray summarizes the derivation from Pelasgi, neighboring land, current at this time. If Pelasgoi is connected, near the word would mean neighbor and would denote the nearest strange people to the invading Greeks. Aha, now we're getting somewhere. And this Julius Pokorny, with his papers in order, so that makes it official, derives Pelasgoi from Pelasgoi, specifically inhabitants of the Thessalian plain. He details a previous derivation, which appears in English at least as early as William Gladstone's study on Homer and the Homeric Age. If the Pelasgians were not Indo-Europeans, the name in this derivation must have been assigned by Hellenes. Ernest Klein argued that the ancient Greek word for sea, pelagos, and the Doric word pelagos, side, which is flat, shared the same root, plaque, and that the Pelasgians were not Indo-Europeans. The name in this derivation must have been assigned by the Hellenes. Ernest Klein argued that the ancient Greek word for sea, pelagos, pelagskoi, therefore, meant the seamen. This could be connected to the maritime marauders referred to as the sea people. In Egyptian records, subsequent scholarship shows that the connection between the two roots is phonetically impossible. Anyways, they're saying that Zeus and the gods were Pelasgian, and the Hellenes simply came in and hijacked them, which would make not the Pelasgians the sea people, but the Hellenes, in my opinion. I mean, where the heck did they come from if they weren't indigenous? So, there were the sea people. Maybe the sea people that everyone is having such a hard time figuring out who was the Hellenes that invaded Greece. They were everywhere. Pelasgians first appear in poems of Homer. Those who are stated to be Pelasgians in the Iliad are among allies of Troy. Oh yeah, they want to kick the Hellenes out. In the section known as the Catalog of Trojans, they are mentioned between mentions of the Hellespontine, between mentions of the Hellespontine cities and the Thracians of southeastern Europe, i.e.,
the Hellespontine border
I don't
of
think
Thrace.
it's a coincidence
Homer
that
calls
hell
whatever
is in
happened
their
to
name.
Thrace. Homer calls their town or district Larissa and characters it as fertile and its inhabitants as celebrated for their spearmanship. His record chiefs he records their as Hippithus and Peleus, sons of Lethus, son of Teutamus, thus giving them all names that were Greek, or so thoroughly Hellenized any foreign element has been effaced. In the Odyssey, Odysseus, affecting to be Cretan himself, instances Pelasgians among the tribes in the 90 cities of Crete, language mixing with language side by side. Last on his list, Homer distinguishes them from other ethnicities on the island. Cretans proper, Achaeans, Sidonians of the city Sidonia, modern Chania, Kanya, Dorians, and noble Pelasgians. The Iliad also refers to the Pelasgic Argos, which is most likely to be the plain of Thessaly, and to Pelasgic Zeus, living in and ruling over Dodona, which must be the oracular one in Epirus. However, neither passage mentions actual Pelasgians. Myrmidons. According to the Iliad, Pelasgians were camping out on the shore together with the following tribes. Towards the sea lie the Carians and the Paeonians with curved bows, and the Leleges and Corcones, and the godly Pelasgi. Whoa, the goodly Pelasgi. Oh, the goodly. Hesiod. Later Greek writers offered little unanimity over which sites and regions were Pelasgian. One of the first was Hesiod. He calls the oracular Dodona, identified by reference to the oak, the seat of Pelasgians. Clarifying Homer's Pelasgic Zeus, he mentions also that Pelasgus, the eponymous ancestors of the Pelasgians, was the father of King Lycaon of Arcadia. The Paeonians. You mean the Paeonians? Is that where the word peon comes from? Paeonian? Wouldn't be surprised. And the Greeks said that the Cretans were known liars. So I would imagine that's why the term Cretan is derogatory today. Julius Caesar, July 100 BC to March 15th, 44 BC. Caesar was a Roman politician and military general who played a critical role in the events that led to the demise of the Roman Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire. He was also an author of Latin prose. Early life and career. Caesar was born to a patrician family, the gens Julia, which claimed descent from Julius, son of the legendary Trojan princess Aeneas, supposedly the son of the goddess Venus. The family originated from Alba Longa, 20 miles south of Rome. The cognomen Caesar originated, according to Pliny the Elder, with an ancestor who was born by Caesarean section, from the Latin verb to cut. The Historia Augusta suggests 3 alternative explanations. That the first Caesar had a thick head of hair, Latin Caesares. He had bright gray eyes,
Oculi CCEs.
or that he killed an elephant in battle.
Caesare Moorish.
Caesar issued coins featuring images of elephants, suggesting that he favored this interpretation of his name. Despite their ancient pedigree, the Julii Caesares were not especially politically influential, although they had enjoyed some revival of their political fortunes in the early 1st century BC. Caesar's father, also called Gaius Julius Caesar, governed the province of Asia, and his sister Julia, Caesar's aunt, married Gaius Marius, one of the most prominent figures in the Republic. His mother, Aurelia Cotta, came from an influential family. Little is recorded of Caesar's childhood. 85 BC, Caesar's father died suddenly, so Caesar was the head of the family at 16. His coming of age coincided with a civil war between his uncle, Gaius Marius, and the rival, Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Both sides carried out bloody purges of their political opponents. Whenever they were in ascendancy, Marius and his ally Lucius Cornelius Cinna were in control of the city when Caesar was nominated as the new Flamen Dialis, high priest of Jupiter, and he was married to Cinna's daughter.
Cornelia.
Following Sulla's final victory, though, Caesar's connections to the old regime made him a target for the new one. He was stripped of his inheritance, his wife's dowry, and his priesthood, but he refused to divorce Cornelia and was forced to go into hiding. The threat against him was lifted by the intervention of his mother's family, which included supporters of Sulla and the Vestal Virgins.
Vestal Virgins.
Sulla gave in reluctantly and is said to have declared that he saw many Marius in Caesar. Ironically, the loss of his priesthood had allowed him to pursue a military career, as the high priest of Jupiter was not permitted to touch a horse, sleep 3 nights outside his own bed, or 1 night outside Rome, or look upon an army. Caesar felt that it would be much safer far away from Sulla, should the dictator change his mind. So he left Rome and joined the army, serving under Marcus Minucius Thermus of Asia and Servilius Isauricus in Cilicia. That rumors arose of an affair with the king, which Caesar vehemently denied for the rest of his life. Hearing of Sulla's death in 78 BC, Caesar felt safe enough to return to Rome. He lacked means since his inheritance was confiscated, but acquired a modest house in Subura.
Subura.
Sounds like suburbs. The origin of suburbs, maybe? A lower-class neighborhood of Rome. He turned to legal advocacy and became known for his exceptional oratory, accompanied by impassioned gestures
and a high-pitched voice,
and ruthless prosecution of former governors, notorious for extortion and corruption. Hey, it was even happening back then. On the way across the Aegean Sea, Caesar was kidnapped by pirates and held prisoner. He maintained an attitude of superiority throughout his entire captivity. Pirates demanded a ransom of 20 talents of silver, but he insisted they ask for 50. After the ransom was paid, Caesar raised a fleet, pursued and captured the pirates, and imprisoned them. He had them crucified on his own authority, as he had promised while in captivity, a promise that the pirates had taken as a joke. As a sign of leniency, he first had their throats cut. He was soon called back into military action in Asia, raising a band of auxiliaries to repel an incursion from the east. On his return to Rome, he was elected military tribune, a first step in a political career. He was elected quaestor for 69 BC, and during that year he delivered the funeral oration for his Aunt Julia, and included images of her husband Marius in the funeral procession, unseen since the days of Sulla. His wife Cornelia also died that year. Caesar went to serve his quaestorship in Spain after her funeral. In the spring or early summer of 69 BC, while there, he is said to have encountered a statue of Alexander the Great, and realized with dissatisfaction he was now at an age when Alexander had the world at his feet, while he had achieved comparatively little. On his return in 67 BC, he married Pompeia, granddaughter of Sulla, whom he later divorced in 61 BC, after her embroilment in the Bona Dea scandal. In 65 BC, he was elected Curia Legio and staged lavish games that won him further attention and popular support. In 63 BC, he ran for election to the post Pontifex Maximus, chief priest of the Roman state religion. He ran against 2 powerful senators. Accusations of bribery were made by all sides. Caesar won comfortably, despite his opponent's greater experience and standing. Cicero was consul that year, and he exposed Catiline's conspiracy to seize control of the republic. Several senators accused Caesar of involvement in the plot. After serving as praetor in 62 BC, Caesar was appointed to govern Hispania Ulteria, modern southeastern Spain, as propraetor, though some sources suggest that he held proconsular power. Caesar was acclaimed imperator in 60 and 45 BC. In the Roman Republic, this was an honorary title assumed by certain military commanders after an especially great victory. Army troops in the field would proclaim their commander imperator, an acclamation necessary for a general to apply to the Senate for a triumph. However, he also wanted to stand for consul, the most senior magistracy in the Republic. If he were to celebrate a triumph, he would have to remain a soldier and stay outside the city until the ceremony. But to stand for election, he would need to lay down his command and enter Rome as a private citizen. He could not do both in the time available. He asked the Senate for permission to stand in absentia, but Cato blocked the proposal. Faced with the choice between a triumph and the consulship, Caesar chose the consulship. Caesar was still deeply in debt. There was money to be made as governor, whether by extortion or by military adventurism. Caesar had 4 legions under his command. 2 of his provinces bordered on unconquered territory, and parts of Gaul were known to be unstable. Some of Rome's Gallic allies had been defeated by their rivals at the Battle of Magetobrica. With the help of a contingent of Germanic tribes, the Romans feared these tribes were preparing to migrate south, closer to Italy, and that they had a warlike intent. Have you heard of preemptive strike? Caesar raised 2 new legions and defeated these tribes. In response to Caesar's earlier activities, the tribes in the northeast began to arm themselves. Caesar treated this as an aggression move, and after an inconclusive engagement against the united tribes, he conquered the tribes piecemeal. Meanwhile, one of his legions began the conquest of the tribes in the far north, directly opposite Britain. During the spring of 56 BC, the triumvirs held a conference, as Rome was in turmoil.
Caesar's political alliance was coming undone.
The Lucca Conference renewed the first triumvirate, and it extended Caesar's governorship for another 5 years. The conquest of the north was soon completed, while a few pockets of resistance remained. Caesar now had a secure base from which to launch an invasion of Britain. In 55 BC, Caesar repelled an incursion into Gaul by 2 Germanic tribes. He followed it up by building a bridge across the Rhine and making a show of force in Germanic territory, before returning and dismantling the bridge. Late that summer, having subdued 2 other tribes, crossed into Britain, claiming that the Britons had aided one of his enemies the previous year, possibly the Veneti of Brittany. His intelligence information was poor. Although he gained a beachhead on the coast, he could not advance further, and returned to Gaul for the winter. He returned the following year, better prepared, with a larger force, and achieved more. He advanced inland and established a few alliances. However, poor harvests led to widespread revolt in Gaul, which forced Caesar to leave Britain for the last time. While Caesar was in Britain, his daughter Julia, Pompey's wife, had died in childbirth. Caesar tried to re-secure Pompey's support by offering him his great niece in marriage, but Pompey declined.
She was but ugly.
In 53 BC, Crassus was killed, leading a failed invasion of the East. Rome was on the brink of civil war. Pompey was appointed sole consul as an emergency measure, and married the daughter of a political opponent of Caesar. The triumvirate was dead. Though the Gallic tribes were just as strong as the Romans militarily, the internal division among the Gauls guaranteed an east victory for Caesar. Vercingetorix's attempt in 52 BC to reunite them against Roman invasion came too late. He proved an astute commander, defeating Caesar in several engagements. But Caesar's elaborate siege works at the Battle of Alesia finally forced his surrender. Despite scattered outbreaks of warfare the following year, Gaul was effectively conquered. Plutarch claimed that during the Gallic Wars, the army had fought against 3 million men, of whom 1 million died, and another 1 million were enslaved, subjugated 300 tribes, and destroyed 800 cities. Civil War. In 50 BC, the Senate, led by Pompey, ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome because his term as governor had finished. Caesar thought he would be prosecuted if he entered Rome without the immunity enjoyed by a magistrate. Pompey accused Caesar of insubordination and treason. On January 10, 49 BC, Caesar crossed the Rubicon River, the frontier boundary of Italy, with only a single legion, the Legio XIII Gemina, and ignited civil war. Upon crossing the Rubicon, Caesar, according to Plutarch and Suetonius, is supposed to have crossed the Rubicon River with only a single legion. He is supposed to have quoted the Athenian playwright Menander in Greek.
The die is cast.
Erasmus, however, notes that the more accurate Latin translation of the Greek imperative mood would be Alia iacta esto, let the die be cast. Pompey and many of the Senate fled to the south, having little confidence in Pompey's newly raised troops. Pompey, despite greatly outnumbering Caesar, who only had his 13th legion with him, did not intend to fight. Caesar pursued Pompey, hoping to capture Pompey before his legions could escape. Pompey managed to escape before Caesar could capture him. Heading for Spain, Caesar left Italy, hoping to capture Pompey before his legions could escape. Pompey managed to escape before Caesar could capture him. Heading for Spain, Caesar left Italy under the control of Mark Antony. After an astonishing 27-day route march, Caesar defeated Pompey's lieutenants, then returned east to challenge Pompey in Illyria, where on 10 July 48 BC, in the Battle of Dyrrhachium, Caesar barely avoided a catastrophic defeat. In an exceedingly short engagement later that year, he decisively defeated Pompey at Pharsalus in Greece on 9 August 48 BC. In Rome, Caesar was appointed dictator with Mark Antony as his master of the horse, second in command. Caesar presided over his own election to a second consulship, and then, after 11 days, resigned his dictatorship. Caesar then pursued Pompey to Egypt, arriving soon after the murder of the general. There, Caesar was presented with Pompey's severed head and seal ring. Receiving these with tears, he then had Pompey's assassins put to death. Caesar then became involved with an Egyptian civil war between the child pharaoh and his sister wife, the co-regent queen, Cleopatra. Perhaps as a result of the pharaoh's role in Pompey's murder, Caesar sided with Cleopatra. He withstood the siege of Alexandria, and later he defeated the pharaoh's forces at the Battle of the Nile in 47 BC and installed Cleopatra as ruler. Caesar and Cleopatra celebrated their victory with a triumphal procession on the Nile in the spring of 47 BC. The royal barge was accompanied by 400 additional ships, and Caesar was introduced to the luxurious lifestyle of the Egyptian pharaohs. Caesar and Cleopatra were not married. Caesar continued his relationship with Cleopatra throughout his last marriage. In Roman eyes, this did not constitute adultery, and probably fathered a son named Caesarion. Cleopatra visited Rome on more than one occasion, residing in Caesar's villa just outside Rome across the Tiber. Later in 48 BC, Caesar was again appointed dictator with a term of 1 year. After spending the first months of 47 BC in Egypt, Caesar went to the Middle East, where he annihilated the king of Pontus. His victory was so swift and complete that he mocked Pompey's previous victories over such poor enemies. On his way to Pontus, Caesar visited Tarsus from 27 to 29 May 47 BC. It says 25 to 27 May, and then it says Greg, where he met enthusiastic support, but where, according to Cicero, Cassius was planning to kill him at this point. Thence, he proceeded to Africa to deal with the remnants of Pompey's senatorial supporters. He was defeated by Titus Labienus at Raspina on 4 January 46 BC, but recovered to gain a significant victory at Thapsus on 6 April 46 BC over Cato, who then committed suicide. After this victory, he was appointed dictator for 10 years. Pompey's sons escaped to Spain. Caesar gave chase and defeated the last remnants of opposition in the Battle of Munda in March 45 BC. During this time, Caesar was elected to his third and fourth terms as consul in 46 BC and 45 BC, this last time without a colleague. Dictatorship and assassination. While he was still campaigning in Spain, the Senate began bestowing honors on Caesar. Caesar had not proscribed his enemies, instead pardoning almost all, and there was no serious public opposition to him. Great games and celebration, bread and circuses, were held in April to honor Caesar's victory at Munda. Plutarch writes that many Romans found the triumph held following Caesar's victory to be in poor taste, as those defeated in the civil war had not been foreigners, but instead fellow Romans. On Caesar's return to Italy in 45 BC, he filed his will, naming his grandnephew Gaius Octavian, later known as Augustus Caesar, as his principal heir, leaving his vast estate and property, including his name. Caesar also wrote that if Octavian died before Caesar did, then Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus would be the next heir in succession in his will. He also left a substantial gift to the citizens of Rome. Between his crossing of the Rubicon in 49 BC and his assassination in 44 BC, Caesar established a new constitution, which was intended to accomplish three separate goals. First, he wanted to suppress all armed resistance out in the provinces, and thus bring order back to the Republic. Second, he wanted to create a strong central government in Rome. Finally, he wanted to knit together all of the provinces into a single cohesive unit. The first goal was accomplished when Caesar defeated Pompey. I don't know if it's Pompey or Pompey. Anyways, when he defeated Pompey and his supporters. I imagine the town Pompey must be named after him. To accomplish the other two goals, he needed to ensure that his control over the government was undisputed. So he assumed these powers by increasing his own authority and by decreasing the authority of Rome's other political institutions. Finally, he enacted a series of reforms that were meant to address several long-neglected issues, the most important of which was his reform of the calendar. When Caesar returned to Rome, the Senate granted him triumphs for his victories, ostensibly those over Gaul, Egypt, Pharnaces, and Juba, rather than over his Roman opponents. Not everything went Caesar's way. When Arsinoe IV, Egypt's former queen, was paraded in chains, the spectators admired her dignified bearing and were moved to pity. Triumphal games were held, with beast hunts involving 400 lions and gladiator contests. A naval battle was held in a flooded basin at the Field of Mars and the Circus Maximus. Two armies of war captives, each of 2,000 people, 200 horses, and 20 elephants, fought to the death. Again, some bystanders complained, this time at Caesar's wasteful extravagance. A riot broke out, and only stopped when Caesar had 2 rioters sacrificed by the priests on the Field of Mars. After the triumph, Caesar set out to pass an ambitious legislative agenda. He ordered a census be taken, which forced a reduction in the grain dole, and decreed that jurors could only come from the Senate or the equestrian ranks. He passed a sumptuary law that restricted the purchase of certain luxuries. After this, he passed a law that rewarded families for having many children to speed up the repopulation of Italy. Then he outlawed professional guilds, except those of ancient foundation. Since many of these were subversive political clubs, he then passed a term limit law applicable to governors. He passed a debt restructuring law, which ultimately eliminated about a fourth of all debts owed. The Forum of Caesar, with its Temple of Venus Genetrix, was then built among many other public works. Caesar also tightly regulated the purchase of state-subsidized grain and reduced the number of recipients to a fixed number, all of whom were entered into a special register. From 47 to 44 BC, he made plans for the distribution of land to about 15,000 of his veterans. The most important change, however, was his reform of the calendar. I don't think that's the most important, but okay. The Roman calendar at the time was regulated by the movement of the moon and replaced it with the Egyptian calendar based on the sun. Roman farmers were able to use it as a basis of consistent seasonal planting from year to year. He set the length of the year to 365.25 days by adding an intercalary leap day at the end of February every 4th year to bring the calendar into alignment with the seasons. He decreed that 3 extra months be inserted into 46 BC, the ordinary intercalary month at the end of February, intercalary, never heard that word before, and 2 extra months after November. Thus, the Julian calendar opened on 1 January 45 BC. This calendar is almost identical to the current Western calendar. Shortly before his assassination, he passed a few more reforms. He established a police force, appointed officials to carry out his land reforms, and ordered the rebuilding of Carthage and Corinth. He also extended Latin rights throughout the Roman world, and then abolished the tax system and reverted to an earlier version that allowed cities to collect tribute however they wanted, rather than needing Roman intermediaries. His assassination prevented further and larger schemes, which included the construction of an unprecedented temple to Mars, a huge theater, and a library on the scale of the Library of Alexandria. He also
wanted to convert Ostia to a major port and cut a canal through the Isthmus of Corinth. Militarily, he wanted to conquer the Dacians and the Parthians.
Parthians.
And avenge the loss at
Karhai.
Karhai. Thus, he instituted a massive mobilization. Shortly before his assassination, the Senate named him Censor for Life and Father of the Fatherland, and the month of Quintilis was named July in his honor. He was granted further honors, which were later used to justify his assassination. As a would-be divine monarch, coins were issued bearing his image, and his statue was placed next to those of the kings. He was granted a golden chair in the Senate, was allowed to wear triumphal dress wherever he chose, whenever he chose, and was offered a form of semi-official or popular cult with Mark Antony as his high priest. The history of Caesar's political appointments is complex and uncertain. Caesar held both dictatorship, tribunate, but alternated between the consulship and the proconsulship. His powers within the state seem to have rested upon these magistracies. On the Ides of March 15th of 44 BC, Caesar was due to appear at a session of the Senate. Several senators had conspired to assassinate Caesar. Mark Antony, having vaguely learned of the plot the night before from a terrified liberator named Servilius Casca and feared the worst, went to head Caesar off. The plotters, however, had anticipated this, and fearing that Antony would come to Caesar's aid, had arranged for Trebonius to intercept him just as he approached the portico of the theater of Pompey, where the session was to be held, and detain him outside. Plutarch, however, assigns his action of delaying Antony to Brutus Albinus, which is supposedly the father of Britain, from Troy, where he heard the commotion from the Senate chamber. Antony fled, according to Plutarch. As Caesar arrived at the Senate, Tillius Cimber presented him with a petition to recall his exiled brother. The other conspirators crowded round to offer support. Both Plutarch and Suetonius say that Caesar waved him away, but Cimber grabbed his shoulders and pulled down Caesar's tunic. Caesar then cried to Cimber, "Why? This is violence. It's decretum vicest." Casca simultaneously produced his dagger and made a glancing thrust at the dictator's neck. Caesar turned around quickly and caught Casca by the arm. According to Plutarch, he said in Latin, "Casca, you villain, what are you doing?" Casca, frightened, shouted, "Help, brother!" in Greek. Within moments, the entire group, including Brutus, was striking out at the dictator. Caesar attempted to get away, but blinded by blood, he tripped and fell. The men continued stabbing him as he lay defenseless on the lower steps of the portico. According to Atropius, around 60 men participated in the assassination. He was stabbed 23 times. According to Suetonius, a physician later established that only one wound, the second one to his chest, had been lethal. The dictator's last words are not known, but certainly and are a contested subject among scholars and historians alike. Suetonius reports that others have said Caesar's last words were the Greek phrase
Kaisu
teknon, "You too, child," in English. However, Suetonius' own opinion was that Caesar said nothing. Plutarch also reports that Caesar said nothing, pulling his toga over his head when he saw Brutus among the conspirators. The version best known in the English-speaking world is the Latin phrase "E tu, Brute, and you, Brutus," commonly rendered as "You too, Brutus," best known from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, where it actually forms the first half of the Macronic line "E tu, Brute," then fall, Caesar. This version was already popular when the play was written, as it appears in Richard Eade's Latin play Caesar Interfectus of 1582. According to Plutarch, after the assassination, Brutus stepped forward as if to say something to his fellow senators. They, however, fled the building. Brutus and his companions then marched to the Capitol while crying out to their beloved city, "People of Rome, we are once again free." They were met with silence, as the citizens of Rome had locked themselves inside their houses as soon as the rumor of what had taken place had begun to spread. Caesar's body lay where it fell, on the Senate floor, for nearly 3 hours before other officials arrived to remove it. Caesar's body was cremated, and on the site of his cremation, the Temple of Caesar was erected a few years later. I mean, they're just like, first of all, they were all cowards. It took 60 of them. He only had 23 stab wounds. Only one was lethal. They're stabbing him like a bunch of girls. And then they all ran. But then they want to honor him by building him a temple. Isn't that just the way they are, too? Jeez. A life-size wax statue of Caesar was later erected in the form of displaying the 23 stab wounds. A crowd who had gathered there started a fire which badly damaged the forum and neighboring buildings. In the ensuing chaos, Mark Antony, Octavian, and others fought a series of 5 civil wars, which would end in the formation of the Roman Empire. Of course, you know the rest. Mark Antony went to Egypt and had a thing going on with Cleopatra, and they ended up dying. Brutus was apparently his best friend or something, and he betrayed him too. It doesn't sound to me like Caesar was doing all that bad. He was trying to help the people. The people loved him, I thought. It's still an interesting story. He was officially deified in 42 BC. The appearance of a comet during the games in his honor, which was probably Venus, was taken as confirmation of his divinity, though his temple was not dedicated until after his death. He may have received divine honors during his lifetime, and shortly before his assassination, Mark Antony had been appointed as his flamen priest. Both Octavian and Mark Antony promoted the cult of Divius Lullius after the death of Caesar. Octavian, as the adoptive son of Caesar, assumed the title Son of God.
Divi Filius.
Divi Filius, Son of God. Based on remarks by Plutarch, Caesar is sometimes thought to have suffered from epilepsy. Modern scholarship is sharply divided on the subject, and some scholars believe that he was plagued by malaria, particularly during the sullen proscriptions of the 80s. Other scholars contend his epileptic seizures were due to a parasitic infection in the brain by a tapeworm. Caesar had 4 documented episodes of what may have been a complex partial seizures, and may additionally have had absence seizures in his youth, and may have suffered from hypoglycemia. I remember one theory that I saw on TV a pretty long time ago said that he wanted to be assassinated because he didn't want to end up dying some old rag-ass renegade, or, only knew war his whole life, and he was getting old, and he had arthritis and stuff like that. Pliny the Elder reports in his Natural History that Caesar's father and forefather died without apparent cause while putting on their shoes. Suetonius, writing more than a century after Caesar's death, describes Caesar as tall of stature with fair complexion, shapely limbs, a somewhat full face, and keen black eyes. Julius Caesar. Caesar and the Pirates.
In 75 BCE, Julius Caesar was captured by Cilician pirates who infested the Mediterranean Sea. The Romans had never sent a navy against them because the pirates offered the Roman senators slaves, which they needed for their plantations in Italy. As a consequence, piracy was common. The Greek author Plutarch describes what happened when Caesar encountered the pirates. The translation was made by Robin Seeger. First, when the pirates demanded a ransom of 20 talents, Caesar burst out laughing. They did not know, he said, who it was they had captured. Then he volunteered to pay 50. Then, when he had sent his followers to various cities in order to raise the money, and was left with 1 friend and 2 servants among the Cilicians, about the most bloodthirsty people in the world, he treated them so high-handedly that whenever he wanted to sleep, he would send to them and tell them to stop talking. For 38 days, with the greatest unconcern, he joined in all their games and exercises, just as if he was their leader instead of their prisoner. He also wrote poems and speeches, which he had read aloud to them. And if they failed to admire his work, he would call them to their faces illiterate savages, and would often laughingly threaten to have them all hanged. They were much taken with this, and attributed his freedom of speech to a kind of simplicity in his character or boyish playfulness. However, the ransom arrived from Miletus, and as soon as he had paid it and been set free, he immediately manned some ships and set sail from the harbor of Miletus against the pirates. He found them still there, lying at anchor off the island, and he captured nearly all of them. He took their property as spoils of war and put the men themselves into prison at Pergamon. He then went in person to Marcus Junius, the governor of Asia, thinking it proper that he, as praetor in charge of the province,
should see to the punishment of the prisoners. Junius, however, cast longing eyes at the money, which came to a considerable sum, and kept saying that he needed time to look into the case. Caesar paid no further attention to him. He went to Pergamon, took the pirates out of prison, and crucified the lot of them, just as he had often told them he would do when he was on the island, and they imagined that he was joking.